of the greenhouse gas issues, climate change issues. I can't remember her name.
National Carbon Capture Center?
Okay.
Climate science.
I think we'll go ahead and start this session.
Mr. Thomas.
Welcome again to the panel session. And I'm going to go ahead and just briefly introduce most of our panel members who spoke this morning. We have a couple other distinguished guests joining us, so just briefly introduce our panel from your right to my left. We have Larry Monroe, Dr. Larry Monroe, who is the Senior Vice President for Environmental Affairs at Southern Company. Seated next to Dr. Monroe is Janet Gellici, who we heard from earlier, again with the National Coal Council. See, right directly to my left is Kenneth Mitchell from the EPA. Paul Chodak is to my right here. We heard from him earlier. And then John Paul Cohen is the Senior Vice President of Operations at PSEG, right there. And so for the format of this, we're just going to briefly start with introductory comments from each of the panel members. And we'll try to go through our discussions there. And then at the end, I did get a question. If you have any other questions, again, you can still bring it up here to this table. I'll try to work that into our discussions. Otherwise, at the end of our panel discussion, we'll drop out into the audience there and see if you have any questions or discussions. We do want you to be a part of this discussion. So with that, Larry, would you like to start with?
Sure. Thank you, Robie. I'm the Senior Vice President of Research and Environmental Affairs, so I'm sort of a schizophrenic person. I have our federal environmental policy, but then our R&D shop at the same time. So it's doom and gloom on one side, and we're very optimistic on the other side about technology. So I'll try to stay right in the middle for y'all. So this is open panel discussion, so I'm just going to throw out a couple things that I worry about from sort of where we sit with our fleet. It's no news to anybody in this room. It's a very challenging time on the environmental front for utilities. So I'll talk some more about that in my presentation later. I will comment that across the Southern Company system, and I should have said initially, welcome to Atlanta. Southern Company Power, Georgia Power is lighting the lights and keeping us cool and or warm today. So I hope you enjoy our territory while we're here. But as I look across our fleet in Alabama and Georgia, Mississippi, and the Panhandle of Florida, we're in the most significant transition that we've seen in our system. And this is due mainly to MATS, the Mercury and Air Toxic Standard, as sort of the opening or the reason to call the question, but it really has to do with coal ash, future water obligations, CO2 sort of things. And so because of the need to invest in MATS or retire plants, we have decided across our system to retire about 15% of our coal fleet. Just shut it down and walk away. We'll dismantle and remediate the place, but we're going to lose that. So, you know, I think about the tension that Janet talked about for us now with the polar vortex and sort of weather events and the extra capacity that we may need for that. We are worried about that. The other thing we've done because of MATS is about 25% of our coal fleet we're converting to natural gas. And so that's taking a regular atmospheric steam boiler and using natural gas instead of the coal fuel. So those will be peaking units. It's not a very efficient way to use natural gas, but we will use that hardware as long as we can, and it makes sense to do that. So that, you know, our coal fleet is diminishing as we go about it. You can see it in the statistics of Southern Company so far this year. Our energy produced is about evenly split at about 40% between natural gas and coal. About 16% nuclear, and the balance is actually renewables, mostly hydro. We have a large hydro fleet across the Southeast for that. What are we looking forward to? The coal ash rule. We're expecting it December 19th. That will impact our sites whether we have closed that coal plant or not closed that coal plant, because we will have to deal with the ash ponds and landfills that we have there. And then the steam effluent guidelines, which is a wastewater treatment rule that we're expecting. The ash rule, December 19th of this year. We understand or we know it's at the White House and the Office of Management and Budget, and so we expect it fully, the coal ash rule, to be finalized December 19th. And then in September of next year, less than a year away, we think the steam effluent guidelines will come out in a final form. So those will be additional sort of things we'll look at. That's the first thing, is just a challenging environmental sort of landscape for us. And the second thing is we're now sort of chasing operational flexibility in our fleet. With these retirements, we're losing smaller generation and moving towards well-controlled large coal stations. So well-controlled means that we have SCRs on most of those. And if you know anything about SCRs, the selective catalytic reduction, that significantly increases your minimum operating load. So now we have larger stations that are less flexible in the way they can adapt. And so how do we respond to the demand? So today's a great example. We'll have a morning peak for heat, particularly from heat pumps here in the Georgia area, and then we may have air conditioning this afternoon if it heats up enough, and so that you'll see these different peaks, and so we're having to work these big coal plants all over the place. So the two things that I worry about are the challenging environmental landscape going forward. I didn't even mention 111D. I'll talk some more about it in this session and later on. And then the need for operating flexibility as we change our fleet. Now, the operating flexibility is very necessary if we're talking about integrating renewables. So here in Georgia, Georgia Power, part of the Southern Company, is the largest participant, or installing the largest voluntary solar fleet across the U.S. So over the next couple of years, Georgia Power will bring on almost 900 megawatts of solar PV. So, you know, it's great when the sun's shining from, call it 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but then I've got to have something that throttles down to accommodate that power and then comes back up to meet it there, so that I'm doing things to make my existing operating fleet less flexible, but at the same time adding other resources that make it necessary for them to be even more flexible. So there's sort of a plus and minus to that. So with that, I'll stop and pass it to Janet.
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to try and add to my presentation from this morning. So I did want to, I guess, start out with a little bit of a disclaimer or a reminder that the National Coal Council is not a lobbying organization, so we don't take positions on regulations or legislation. So we hope that what we do in terms of our reports for the Secretary help inform the dialogue, but I will be drawing on some of the, again, findings from our studies. So our May 2014 study on the existing coal fleet, we feel has great relevance and important things to contribute to the 111D regulation. I think in looking at that regulation, to me, I see one of the building blocks and one only that has anything to do with the existing coal fleet. If we look at them, efficiency improvements as one of the building blocks, using less electricity, not necessarily related to the existing coal fleet, build more low-emitting energy resources, in other words, build more renewable, that's a new build, and certainly using lower emitting power sources, natural gas, I see that as a new type of a plant, or using some of the existing. So really, if I focus just on the one building block that has been proposed on fossil fuel plants, increasing their efficiency, I go back to what we looked at in the study, and again, it's how serious are we about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We've seen some information this morning and some good statistics on the increase in coal use globally, And I don't think that we can stick our finger in the dike here in the U.S. and expect that that's going to make an impression or is going to necessarily solve this issue. I do believe that the United States needs to take a strong leadership role in international markets. We have the Paris discussions coming up in about a year, and I think that's a critical opportunity for us to step up and take that leadership role in international markets. But us doing this alone obviously is not going to help. I do believe in the value of technology solutions, and I do believe that they are needed. We need to move beyond the R&D stage on a lot of these projects and get them into a demonstration mode. It's important for us. I had an opportunity to talk at the break with a gentleman who's talking about what China has on the ground and going on, and certainly a lot more experience in developing some of these cleaner coal plants and facilities, well ahead of us on that. So I think we need to move into the demonstration phase. Modeling is important, and as Robie stressed this morning, it's an important part of what DOE is working on, but modeling alone is not going to get us where we need to get in terms of some actual on-the-ground experience with some of these technologies. And of course, as we talk about technology, we continue to talk about the need for increased investment on the part of industry and government. And I'm not singling out government alone here. I think industry needs to step up its efforts as well in terms of supporting with their dollars the advancement of these technologies. But it's not a money or technology issue alone. And I think what we need is a stronger, serious commitment to a genuine all-of-the-above energy policy. And I think we've seen models in the last decade or so that have worked. If you look at the enhanced use of renewables, increased solar, increased wind, that was in large part due to the support that was provided by government policies and regulations, that was supported in large part by government financial incentives, production tax credits. So there was a lot of effort put into the renewable energy industry. There was a lot of effort and policy support given to the natural gas industry, and we can see that benefiting our nation right now in terms of the resources that we have available to us from natural gas. What I'd like to suggest is that if a concomitant support and devotion and commitment to finding a solution for greenhouse gas emissions was undertaken by our industry and our government, that we would be well ahead of where we are today. And I think that needs to take place. So again, using those as models. And then finally, this is not something that's going to get done easily without the commitment and support of the financial community. And I think we leave them out of the picture a lot. But Paul started his presentation this morning with a great graphic of, if you were a financial investor, would you invest in this industry? And I think clearly the answer is no. So we need to identify some creative financing tools, and the current loan guarantee program I don't think is working. We're doing kind of an assessment of that in our current study for the Secretary, so we'll have some more detailed information on that in January. But these programs do not appear to be working. The Congressional Research Service has recently come out with its assessment of these loan guarantee programs under fossil and has come to a similar conclusion. So it's broken. I'm not sure how we fix it. Hopefully we'll have some constructive ideas on that. And it's a bit of a conundrum when you're talking about the financial community. The financial community thrives on volatility. The coal industry is a baseload, consistent, priced industry. We've been the foundation for energy for our nation. And if you're someone in the investment community, I'd suggest that, maybe you're interested more in the volatility that natural gas and intermittent renewables offers. So it's a bit of a conundrum, but, it's always good to have questions, and it's always good to have panels like this so we can address some of these questions and discuss them and maybe come up with some ideas. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ken. Ken?
I just take that one? Thanks. Thank you. I'll keep my remarks very short because I think I said it all earlier. First, I want to thank Southern Company for keeping the lights on. I look forward to them doing that for many, many, many years to come. But how do we go about doing that? I did want to reiterate just a couple things about the 111D rule. One is that it's just a proposal. So it's not final, it's just a proposal. We want to hear from you not only what's wrong with it. I think there are a lot of comments on what's wrong with it. We also want to hear how to make it right. What would make this thing work for everybody? So as you're crafting your comments, which are due by December 1st, please keep that in mind. We do want to hear what we got wrong, but we also need to hear what would make this work. So, for those of you who are writing in comments, please keep that in mind. The other thing that I wanted to mention, just a couple of other things just very briefly. One is that in a lot of the cost and benefit analyses that I see people make in presentations, there are lots of meetings like this going on and have been going on all over the country for some time now about 111D. A lot of the cost benefit analysis are limited to the costs of changing the energy industry to make it less carbon intensive. What seems to be left out a lot, and I know that there's just a big question about how to do this, is what are the costs of inaction for not taking steps forward to make our energy industry less carbon intensive? So a lot of people are on board with that. Some people aren't. But I raised the IPCC this morning, their most recent report released on Sunday. I recommend it to your perusal. It's ipcc.ch. It's the fifth synthesis analysis. And it draws a kind of a stark picture of where we may be going in the not too distant future if the whole world, China included, don't take some critical steps to reduce our carbon emissions. As mentioned, the next big chance for the world to come together on this is next year in Paris to try and negotiate a new climate change protocol for the planet. There's a lead-up meeting to that in a few months. It may even be next month in Lima, Peru. And it's the kind of leadership that I think the American government is taking with your participation that will help foster a better conversation when we go into those negotiations. So I do think that there's some very, it's very relevant to say we can't do this alone, and if China continues down its path, that this is kind of pouring a cup of water into the ocean and pretending like you've made it rise an inch. Well, so that is one argument, but the flip side of that is that there's a cost to inaction, and our country has always been its best when it was leading. That's what we're known for, leading and succeeding. So I'm hopeful about where we can go, and what we need from you all are great ideas about how to get there, because we either have to get there or it's going to be a very different planet within decades. And I'll just end by saying that one of the things that I think will help us, I think will help us get there very quickly, and which frequently gets kind of minimized in the conversation, is energy efficiency. So I've heard it said that our most valuable energy resource in America is energy efficiency. There was a study done here for the southeastern region not too many years ago by Marilyn Brown at Georgia Tech on the energy efficiency potential for the southeast. I know Marilyn well. She is a very smart person. quite good at what she does. And if her estimates of the costs and the benefits of energy efficiency are anywhere near right, we're talking about many tens of billions of dollars in benefits and thousands upon thousands of new jobs in energy efficiency. So while we're thinking about how to make electricity, we ought to also be thinking about how to use what we need in the most efficient manner possible. And the 111D proposal takes, if anything, a modest approach to encouraging the build out of energy efficiency. We can do a lot more, and we can do it in a cost-effective manner and avoid the need for the electrons that could cost more in the future. So I'll just stop with that. And, last thing, I forgot to mention this morning, a lot of people have asked a question about rate versus mass. In our proposal, we showed one way you could do a rate to mass conversion. People have told us loud and clear they either don't get it or it's not enough of an explanation. So we are trying to respond to that, and I believe that you can expect that in the very near future. Thanks.
Good morning again. I'm going to try and keep my comments pretty short and kind of at a high level. You know, the system we have today was built over many decades with safety, reliability, cost, and in the last few decades, environmental impact factored in. And it was built decision at a time, meticulously over time. And in doing that, in the last couple of decades, we have a history of reducing emissions substantially, SO2, NOx, particulate, without dramatically increasing cost and while maintaining or improving grid reliability, because it was done in a very methodical fashion. However, we are entering a period of massive transition, in part driven by EPA regulations, also going to be driven by distributed generation renewables. Recent EPA policy is causing the retirement of over 20% of the U.S. coal fleet in fairly short order, in a time scale of like 5 years. And 111D has the potential to push that up to a third retirement. And that's not being done with a balanced policy of looking at safety, reliability, and cost. It's only looking at environmental impact. And I don't think that that is good leadership. If you look at the example that we have in Germany, so they decided that they're not going to do nuclear, they don't really have cost-effective gas, and they wanted to reduce their CO2. And so obviously renewables were the right answer. The net result of the German policy is much, much more expensive power and increased CO2 emissions. Let me say that again. The net result of the policy was to increase cost and increase CO2 emissions. So it's very possible to get policy wrong. Germans are very smart people, yet they got the policy wrong. They didn't get what they were trying to achieve. And so what I would say is, when you talk about where do we want to go from here, we have tools. We have energy efficiency. We have renewables. We have nuclear. We have potential for CCS technology development. Let's lead through technology. There are no quick answers here. We're not going to get it done by 2020. There's no way to reverse what's happened over the last several decades in a few years. It's going to have to happen over time, and it's going to have to happen with very considered policy, and that policy should take into account safety, reliability, cost, and environmental impact. That's how we need to lead as we go forward.
Thank you. Good morning. I just wanted to make a few comments from an operational perspective and kind of give you a perspective on our fleet, not in the specifics, but I think we're in a bit of a unique position. As I was introduced, I work for a public service enterprise group, operate in the PJM region. We have 8 coal plants. 7 of them are either completely fitted with back-end technology or will be by the end of the year. And one of them, we've taken other technological approaches such as low sulfur coal from Indonesia to be compliant. We did these many years ago, most of these, long before the requirements were there. So we look at ourselves as being an environmentally advanced company. I'll give you some other things that we've done, and it isn't all about PSEG, but what I can say at the end, we're still facing a number of challenges, and I think there is a way to solve and address this. In the coal units, we put in fish-friendly screens, as we call them. But leaving the regulation to the states has resulted in one state who believes that when you take things like non-value cost, which is a change, for example, of species in the inlets or in the waterway, that they see the best technology, least cost is cooling towers. They value that, and we have to figure out a way to work that in without attaching something that ends up requiring cooling towers. None of our coal plants have cooling towers. And they will all shut down if we go that direction. But we do have the fresh, fish-friendly screens. As I said, we have BET. We use, one plant uses low sulfur coal. We are MATS compliant at all our units. We stopped using ash ponds about 10 years ago. We've been slowly cleaning them. We actually mixed the ash that's in the ash ponds with our other ash and use it, ship it to a mine in Pennsylvania where they're reclaiming the mine. But still, we have a lot of things facing our coal plants. We have the residuals issue. We have the CO2 we've talked about. We have some of the others that are out there. In combined cycles, we use gray water, so we don't take from the streams, but not every place can do that. We're fortunate. Many people say it's not fortunate to be in New Jersey, but we're fortunate that in that area there's a lot of industry, so there's a lot of gray water that can be used. We fitted our new peaking units with SCRs. On the other hand, get the other side. We're retiring 1,500 megawatts of peaking units because they can't environmentally comply next spring. It's 1,500 megawatts out of about 13,000 we have. We also see that the capacity factors for our coal units, because driven primarily by low gas, but a number of other things, have gone from 80% to the single digits in the last 4 years. Now coming back up. For ours, it's a mode of survival. We're fortunate also to have a traveling maintenance group, so we have dual fuel capability in our coal plants. Even though they're full back end, three of them burn gas. They can burn gas, so we're partially coal in the winter, coal in the summer, gas in the spring and the fall, and those factors are coming back up. We move our people around. We have an IBW union, but we're able to move people from plant to plant, so we're able to survive the current situation. Having said all that, we talked about we've got to price in something like the polar vortex. I don't know how we're going to do that. The current business models don't price volatility, especially volatility when it's difficult to determine to what extreme. We currently do not have any plans to retire coal. We don't think that the current regulations will put us in that mode. However, we've made such investments and the forward gas prices are so low, it's difficult to make the other investments you need to keep a 40-year-old plant to get to 60. So I don't know if it'll be the environmental area. It could be others, but we currently plan on operating our coal units. I think what's needed is we need an aggregate approach to the regulation. It's hard to be on the negative side of any one regulation. We want clean water, we want cleaner air. But when you look at the aggregate impact, it's causing a significant problem. And we say all and everything strategy type of strategy, but we need to have something that looks at the aggregate of the impacts with the existing plants. And perhaps, as Paul said, we lead with technology. And in between now and the technology part, we've got to come up with a way of reviewing these. The NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is modeling an aggregate approach to the nuclear plants. on policies and regulations and trying to figure out, as they make regulations, what's the priority? They do a cost benefit for all of them. What's the priority, at what urgency, and what's going to be the aggregate impact of the plants? And I think that we need somebody such as the Environmental Protection Agency or some other group to sit down and look at the aggregate impact, working with the utilities. I have no doubt we'll solve this. We'll change the business model that we use over time, but as Paul said, it's going to take time. We can't undo 50, 60 years of getting these plants where they are in a matter of 5 or 10, 20 years. We just can't get there without some new thinking. One of the models that we're looking at, we talked about energy efficiency at our company, we're working now to change the mindset of the consumer. I should be paid if I can reduce your energy costs in some fashion. Now, our product's a little different, but that's what they do in the automobile industry. We demanded more miles per gallon. The technology went in. 9-speed transmissions when we had 3 speeds just in 1990, so the technology's led the way. And guess what? We pay more for those cars for the environmental benefit that we're getting for more mileage. It's good for us as a consumer. It's good for the companies that build the cars, and it's good for the environment. And we're working with that to get our consumers to understand our product's different, but I think if we accept this as a challenge and not as an alarmist, that global warming's real and bad things are going to happen, take it as a challenge. And I think we can solve it. And there are some interim steps we can take. With that.
Again, I'm Robie Lewis. I'm a program manager for Crosscutting Research at the Department of Energy. And I like Janet, in my position, we don't really take a stand one way or the other on the policies. It's our job to see what we can do about implementing. And I appreciate your cheerleading on terms of the R&D. In my position, I'm not allowed to comment even on the budget levels that are coming towards us. So I appreciate you cheerleading for us in terms of getting the monies to continue in that research area. And it is interesting as we've moved, through the years that I've worked at the DOE, we keep adding D's to the end of R&D, right? So we not only development and demonstration, as Janet mentioned, but now we've added, a third one to deployment, where we're actually trying to work through the development of the demonstration and actually get it deployed as well. So that's it's kind of emphasizes or highlights what our emphasis is in doing the work that we do. So I again, just in my role, we're looking to try to develop some of these technology that would realize the increased efficiencies, and I look forward to seeing all the booths that we have next door and interacting with you individually, just to get your comments on what it is that the government, we at the Department of Energy specifically, could be doing to help in those efforts. So, with that, I just want to thank the panel for their comments, and I think that the organizers have put together a good, diverse, well representative of the different areas in this topic. And we'll go into some more of discussions here. But to start with, I'm just going to ask the panel in general. We did get one comment, so I want to start with it to be true to my word that I would get those questions before you. The comment that I got, or the question I got, was, could you comment on the role that energy storage could or should play in future energy policy? Anybody would like to comment on the role of energy storage?
I'll talk about it a little bit. You know, it's from a Southern Company perspective, we think it's an important technology area. We're dedicating, you know, sort of significant research funds to looking at energy storage. We're very early on in that process. Some constraints are trying to put a value on what storage is worth. The way the grid operates now, it's very hard to determine so that I can show a public utility commission if I have this storage, what it's worth. I think that day will come. I mentioned renewables. I mentioned the solar PV here in Georgia. Once we get to a certain level of renewables, then having storage sort of helps you gain all of that you can get. Got a personal opinion as a technologist. I don't think it'll be billions of little batteries. It may be. I'm a chemical engineer, so I sort of like the flow batteries, the big sort of chemical systems there, but could be hydrogen. We already have pump storage in our system, both in a sort of isolated sense, but also in some of our hydroelectric dams. The challenge of how to price it is probably the biggest drawback right now. So if I'm in a system with excess sort of renewable energy to capture that and use it at some other time, then I can put great value on that, particularly at very low marginal energy costs. So sort of Southern Company's view of it is we are going to push forward with the technology. We think it's probably a game changer in the way we run our systems, but it's going to be a while before it becomes terribly important.
We've also, American Electric Power has also been looking at energy storage technology for a number of years. And one of my favorite quotes came from a Russian scientist when we were over there talking to folks at the Chodak Institute. They've been developing supercapacitor technology. And he basically said the perfect cost-effective battery is just 10 years away. And that's been the statement for about the last 50 years. It is a game changer, potentially a game changer. The challenge is going to be that technological innovation, and it really is going to take an innovation. It's kind of hard to schedule a brilliant idea. And so we'll just have to see as that technology develops, it will change things considerably.
Any other thoughts? In terms of as we go forward, moving forward in planning for future regulations, Ken, I was just curious from your presentation, I jotted down a question on your the breakdown of the carbon emissions. The next largest sector that you hadn't circled was the industry at 20%. In terms of the future, do you know, is that sector on the horizon in terms of policy?
Oh, you mean specifically for carbon?
Yes.
Yes. Not that I know of. The way we're approaching stationary source carbon emissions for the time being is through permitting for new and modified sources. They have to undergo what's called a best achievable technology control technology analysis to get a permit to build. And then through these 111B and D rules for new and existing sources. So as far as I know, that's what's on the horizon. A lot of industrial sectors work best when they work in a partnership program with EPA and DOE. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, a number of efforts that we do reach out to and work with smaller industrial sectors to do an evaluation of their a lot of times their energy efficiency and find ways for them to reduce their energy needs and save money. So, and people get on board with that really quickly when we help them see opportunities for small investment and large payback. So For the time being, it's those kinds of things that I believe we're on track to continue doing with the industrial sectors, the commercial sectors, and that sort of thing.
During one of the presentations, there was talk about the shift in moving the baseload plants to cycling due to these changes. Would you care to just explain to the audience? I'm not sure how familiar everybody is, but what affects kind of affects a plant that's designed for baseload moving into cycling. What kind of adverse effects, or what do we need to understand, or in terms of, so from my perspective, right, in terms of a technology, is there something that that we need to help get in place to enable them to do that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. A couple of things. It's kind of interesting. Our peaking units, which were designed for cycling, are now running longer. And so where we used to cycle them up or down maybe 2 or 3 times a day, we tend to bring them on no more than twice a day. So they're running longer. On the other hand, the units that were meant to be baseload are coal, are steam units, and their combined cycles are cycling more. There's a whole new set of problems that are coming in as a result in all multiple areas of the plants. On some of the units now they're assigning a cycling factor. So just like running so much time you have to do maintenance, if you cycle so many times you have to do maintenance. Plants that didn't have this before, it's not a new concept. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing, for example, we put in back-end technology. On a coal plant, coal has sulfur in it. Gas has a higher moisture content. So when we switch to gas, we have to make sure the sulfur's out so we don't get sulfur or sulfuric acid. The downside is that when we cycle back and forth from coal to gas, we're seeing greater degradation in the ductwork. And that's the type of things I'm talking about, expenses. So we're finding that things that you never had a problem with, like ductwork in a coal plant, become an issue. Bags in a bag filter house. It's a big bag filter house with thousands of these bags that are 8, 10 feet long that are just particulate filters. Well, they like a certain temperature, and you run at different temperatures now than we used to. Somebody said you put an SCR on it, you can't go to the same minimum loads. So those bags degrade differently than they did before. And those are millions of dollars of investment that goes. So there are things that EPRI is involved with and others, but things we're just finding out that when we called vendor a few years ago, they'd say we've never had this problem. Now they're telling us, oh yeah, we're seeing that problem, and it's kind of opening up a whole new development area. And I can give you multitudes of issues that we're seeing that are just being addressed. And you would have thought 50, 60, 70, 100-year-old technology would have that.
So in terms of the impact of efficiency of cycling these plants are incredibly optimized, particularly the steam paths are very optimized, where you have steam being bled off and recirculated back to be reheated, and it all assumes steady state. It assumes that you're just humming along and everything's at the right temperature, and then that's when you hit optimum efficiency. So if you're running at half load, then those temperatures are all off, and that whole system is off. It's kind of like if you were to take an SUV and design, or an off-road vehicle designed for off-road, and then decide you're going to use it as a race car around a track. I mean, you can do it, it just doesn't work particularly well. And you wouldn't expect to get peak performance using it that way. And that's particularly for coal plants. That's true.
So I'll continue my cheerleading for R&D, and I think that one of the things that that has kind of fallen off the plate here is the research and development that would look at improved materials and sensors and controls, and these are the types of things that are needed to get a better understanding of the cycling and its impacts on environmental control systems as well. So stronger, more corrosion-resistant alloys and metal coatings, thin-walled components, thinner walls means less temperature change and stress damage. Sensors and controls, just that can automate the optimization of systems to facilitate this cycling mode. So these were things that the DOE has had experience, the national labs have had experience and have been researching, but focus has changed in recent years to a lot of the CCS technologies, and we've lost a little bit of our focus on advancing the need for these types of research and development efforts to continue. So we've encouraged the Secretary to kind of take a second look at those now that especially we're increasingly calling on these units to cycle, and that there's some extra value in going back to the drawing board or picking up where we had left off there. So.
I'll echo a lot of the other comments there, but I'll mention one more. Is EPA is responding to a request to look at startup shutdown and malfunction from an environmental performance. So while I agree with my colleagues here about, we all sort of know in the automotive business, a car that's driven around town is less reliable than one that has the same number of miles driven on the highway, sort of the cruising versus stopping and starting. You can think of the brakes, you can think of corrosion or anything. The problem we're running into here as we're starting up, particularly these coal plants, more and more and shutting them down, trying to regulate the load. If we then have a very restrictive sort of the environmental rules that apply while you're running at steady state apply to startup and shutdown, then that further constricts how we can operate the system and bring those loads to sort of regulate how much power is used there. So I know here in Georgia, with auto inspections in the cars before computers, they told you to make sure that it's warmed up and you've driven before you come in for your emissions test. And it's sort of the same thing we operate in coal plants. The emissions control just take time to get up to temperature and get operating, and we can't start all of them up as we're starting the plant up. So it's just a different wrinkle. We have the corrosion, the mechanical, the control, the thermal sort of issues, but also possibly an environmental issue.
Thanks. I think that's a concept that not everybody fully understands, and so I appreciate all of your comments on that. Did you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to go back and, if you're done with that topic, I wanted to get back.
Sure, yes, please.
Just clarify something I said a minute ago. You asked me a question and I didn't think it through fully on the question of what we may be doing into the future for some of the other industry sectors other than the power plants themselves. There are a couple of things I would keep your eye on. One is if you look at the key greenhouse gases, the main one is CO2. It's the weakest greenhouse gas, but it's also the one that is by far and away released in the largest amounts. So that's kind of the main focus of our current regulatory efforts. But the second most important one is methane. And we have limited regulatory, we have limited regulations right now that address methane as a greenhouse gas. But there is this thing called the President's Methane Strategy, which came out earlier this year, and it lists a number of activities that federal agencies are tasked to work on, including EPA. So I would take a look at that to see some of the areas of consideration. And clearly one of the, someone mentioned it earlier today, it's a very good one, leaks from the production and distribution system for natural gas are a concern. It's one of the areas where we may be able to find ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I would take a look at those two things. The other thing is that the refrigerants and coolants that are out there, we're reducing those, as you know, regulatorily already through the International Montreal Protocol. and trying to find less greenhouse gas potent substitutes. So that's already ongoing. Just wanted to mention those two things.
Great, thanks, Kenneth. Before I jump out and try to get a couple of questions, our time's almost up actually, so it's good discussion. Any other comments that panel members have any thoughts? Okay, I'm going to stand up here and, as promised, look for questions from the audience. Any questions?
Mark Pastori from EES. If we think of a power plant as a chemical manufacturing facility, it really is. Every single byproduct that comes from it can be used in industry, various industries. The CO2, there's plenty of demand in chemical manufacturing. There's a use for every single thing that comes out of that coal plant. So my question is, has anybody from the DOE or the EPA or any of these organizations actually looked at why is the power industry bearing the cost of everything when those raw materials are valuable to our industries? Why wouldn't a chemical company, say, look for a CO2 capture investment, a joint venture, and actually make money from that product? They can use that raw material. Why is it all being borne on the power industry? This is actually something that can benefit all of our manufacturing, chemical, agriculture. Has that been mentioned or brought up at all in these debates? I think it's important to look at it from the overall perspective where they can use these raw materials. Why not invest in it?
So I'll mention two things that Southern Company is looking at in that way. You may or may not be familiar with our under construction coal plant. It's our Kemper County gasification facility, and we're doing exactly what you're suggesting there. So as we're converting that coal to a high hydrogen syngas to burn, as we clean it up, we have found markets for the products there. So we don't have NOx because of gasification, but we do make ammonia in that plant. And so we'll capture the ammonia, we'll sell that into the chemical industry from that power production plant. We'll also make sulfuric acid from the sulfur that's in that coal, and we will sell it from that plant in Mississippi. The biggest one is we're capturing about 65% of the carbon dioxide as we're cleaning up that gas to burn in a combustion turbine. And geographically, it's located in a great part of the country. There's an existing CO2 pipeline that actually runs to the southeast towards Alabama and to the southwest towards Louisiana and Texas that's actually using natural CO2 that's captured from an extinct volcano under Jackson, Mississippi. And so we will sell that CO2 into that pipeline. That CO2 is used to produce more oil from mature oil fields in enhanced oil recovery. And so at least in mature petroleum production fields, there is not a requirement, but a need for CO2. And so the oil companies are willing to pay fairly good dollars for the CO2 there. CO2 makes the oil less viscous and helps force it out of the sandstone pores it's in. The majority of it stays underground. The oil companies typically capture the CO2 because it's so valuable for them and recycle it there. So it is a form of sequestration. In our conventional power plants, we do sell ash when we can. The biggest use for it is replacing Portland cement in concrete in specific uses. We also sell it as a fill material. It's actually used in carpet manufacture and sometimes in aggregate. We also can sell gypsum from our scrubbers, the calcium sulfate. Here in Georgia, we sell gypsum to a wallboard manufacturing there. So in one sense, it's not integrated. I think you were suggesting a much more integrated approach. This is more catch it as we can, because our biggest concern is that we have to supply this electricity when it's needed. So if someone shuts those lights off, something changes at a power plant, I can't guarantee this many tons per year to a purchaser right now. So we need a little bit of sort of more sophisticated markets to do that. Now, the one real crazy one that's out there in the future is, and we're working with several groups, is using coal ash as a ore for rare earths, so that we could take that, extract the minerals we can out of it. Not sure where that's going to go. May or may not be successful, but at least we're making some direction that way. But Kemper is probably our biggest one, where we'll actually realize revenue from ammonia, from sulfuric acid, and from the CO2.
So when you look at all that revenue, how does that model look compared to a regular power plant? You're actually, for the investment that was made, is it going to be a good model going forward?
Well, the revenues are somewhat comparable between the power production and the chemical production. So, you know, it looks like a good model if you're in the right location and can sell it.
I would also note that take a look in the literature. There are any number of papers about what you could also sell the CO2 for, in addition to enhanced oil recovery. Well, there's a number of papers about, you know, turning it, using it as a raw material for plastics, growing algae to then use as a fuel. I mean, and on and on and on. So
I guess my question was, did any companies that say make plastic show an interest in wanting to invest in that?
yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I
that's,
don't know.
that
Yeah.
There was a project through the Recovery Act that was making plastics that did show interest. They applied, they got a contract and went through the demonstrations of that. It's I don't think when you start manufacturing plastic, you're not utilizing as much CO2 on a scale in terms of compared to EOR. But you are able to use it and make a product. So there is a company out there that is doing that. There's more than one, but I know that one specifically.
And I think, you know, Mark, it gets back to financing a new model. So the Texas Clean Energy Project by Summit Power, for example, you know, they're reinvigorated on their efforts, but they've been stymied by, you know, challenges associated with securing financing. And, you know, they had secured some financing actually in international markets, not here in the U.S., but from China, and you know, things kind of fell apart, and now they're coming back together again. But it's and you know, so there's some challenges, and you've got that kind of a business model transition on top of you know, an industry that's going through a transition in terms of less power demand and distributed generation. So the only other industry I'm happy I don't work for is the healthcare industry. That's got to be harder, but.
My name is Maeve Mason, and I actually work with South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, so the state agency, the state area agency. I have a couple of questions, or statements rather. Ken, you had mentioned doing cost-benefit analysis and kind of working that into the promulgation of this rule. One question is, my understanding is that EPA hasn't done a really significant cost-benefit analysis related to environmental justice impacts and implications. Despite the Plan EJ 2014. So I wondered if that would be part of the final rule. And then my second question is, we've talked a lot about time and addressing the time to implement this rule. Given this is fundamental energy policy, has EPA or any of the other panelists talked or thought a lot about how states will implement this given the issues of current statutory authority, i.e. with dispatch and public service commissions and that kind of a thing, that being a concern for us is whether we just have the statutory authority or if we have to revise that statutory authority, the time it takes to do it.
Yes and yes. So, well, yes on the EJ question, in the sense that we do understand very much so there are a lot of many communities in America that are at risk for climate impacts. And then you have the competing issue of rising energy bills that we talked about earlier, and how you avoid those for poor people in particular by ramping up energy efficiency in their homes so that the net is a benefit for them. But in terms of impacts, clearly there are a number of different types of susceptible communities to climate change impacts. We understand that. There are a number of papers and whatnot. Oxfam did a very fairly famous one a couple of years ago on the impacts on vulnerable people from climate change. University of South Carolina and Susan Cutter did that study. There is some literature out there. In my recollection of the regulatory impact analysis that was done for 111D does not quantify those costs. I don't know whether the final rule will do that. People have raised that. You're not the first person to raise that question. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about what we have done and what we might do. But I don't know for sure whether the final rule will quantitate that. What was the second question? Oh, about the time to change. Yes. So yeah, Janet McKay, who's the Assistant Administrator for Air and Radiation, she's the one responsible for this rule. She was the Clean Air Director for the state of Indiana for a long time and has been working in and around state governments for a lot of her career. She is keenly aware of the issues of the potential need for statutory, regulatory, and maybe even legislative action to put the various legal instruments in place, particularly in the portfolio approach that we have proposed, where the legal requirement for reducing greenhouse gas emissions may rest in part with the power plants themselves, but in part with other people, other organizations, and the challenges associated with doing that could require some, significant amount of time. So they understand that issue very well. I can't say how it will play out into the final rulemaking, but they certainly, I believe, contemplated it in crafting the proposal.
So Southern Company's view is that we fundamentally disagree with the agency on this approach. We've said before the rule came out, after the rule came out, that the authority EPA has in this regime is limited to the source itself, what we call inside the fence. The proposal goes way outside the fence, across the whole electric system there, so that, we could not agree to it even if we wanted to, because it's not authority that we have to give. Here in Georgia, the elected Public Service Commission determines the energy mix, determines the amount of energy efficiency required there. It's not the state environmental protection division here that has that authority. So for it to even happen in Georgia and the other states in the Southeast, there would have to be a change in the state government. Now, we think what we call the cooperative federalism in the environmental arena, which is where the Clean Air Act delegates to the states a lot of authority, lots of responsibility for compliance there, controls in this area. And so that while the Clean Air Act says what the states can and can't do and what EPA is allowed to do, at the same time the Federal Power Act declares what EPA, it doesn't give EPA any authority to talk about energy mix or how states approach their energy planning.
And we have heard all of those loud and clear, and it would surprise me personally, greatly surprise me if there weren't lawsuits on these very issues on the day after we we finalized the rules. So you know, we'll have to see where all that goes. But the reason why, just for everybody to understand, the reason why we ended up with this rule is because the best system of emission reduction, as we proposed it, contemplates the interrelated nature of the electricity production and distribution system, and where you can find real meaningful environmental benefit through technologies that are well understood, like energy efficiency, like renewable energy, things like that. So that's kind of how we ended up with this proposal. And then, of course, people have raised the issue of is it legally defensible as a Clean Air Act 111D rule? And so we'll obviously have to see where that lands.
Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and conclude the panel discussion for this afternoon. Would you join with me in thanking the schedule now has us convened to lunch. We'll be back here at 1 o'clock and we'll start the afternoon session. Thank you.